Hey, it's Bruce Rouse here, um, interviewing Graham Davies, who's a highly experienced and accomplished energy efficiency engineer. Um, Graham, you're working now for a company that manages a building portfolio as a sustainability manager, I believe. Is it sustainability or energy manager?
Uh,
Mhm.
so a lot of people call me a manager, but it's the role's actually
Mhm.
sustainability engineer,
Right.
and then I feed into the national sustainability manager. But ultimately, yes, I do somewhat manage manage affairs, but not necessarily people.
Okay, great. So what do you do in your work? What are the details of what you do?
Well, essentially, as a sustainability engineer for Mirvac, um, we're an integrated business, so we have office, industrial, retail, residential, but I'm just involved with the office portfolio in Melbourne. And basically, I help the teams drive the energy and water performance in the commercial buildings. So in Melbourne, we have 10 operational buildings, and they range in age and size. Um, and obviously, I support Mirvac's a developer as well as a owner operator. So I support some of the lead up to the developments and providing design feedback.
Okay, so you're working on newer projects as well as existing buildings,
A
advising
little
on newer
bit
projects.
more as
Yeah.
a representative to the owner. Mirvac's a little different in that we have our own construction arm and development arm. So we don't contract a builder in the traditional way because it's part of our business model. But we work with those teams as a representative back to the trust and the owner of the building to ensure that we are getting what we're asking for.
Great, great. So, what sort of can you be specific about a couple of the projects that you've done? One or two projects, like involving
In
energy? Yeah.
in terms of uh, operational buildings, or yeah,
In terms of operational buildings would be interesting. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Well, I suppose Mirvac's got some pretty big agenda items as far as its strategic objectives. It's already achieved being net positive carbon as an overall business. It's done that through largely procurement of electricity through a renewable energy contract, and then we have a balance of emissions that we use high quality offsets. Um, so they're the bigger ticket items of the business, but now we have um, quite a strong objective to decarbonize the overall business and remove its dependency from fossil fuels um, through a process of electrification. So that's a big undertaking for existing buildings. New buildings, less so because you can design all of that technology in. But for existing buildings, very challenging to convert from what is traditionally a gas plant for heating and hot water and moving it away and to an electric based fuel source. So that's an ongoing piece of work that as a team we're all sort of collaborating on. Every building's different, as you know, so they all have their nuances, and how you apply the technology is going to depend on all of those factors: spatials, electrical demand, um, uh, future developments, tenant disruption. There's so many variables that come into play. So we're at that, I suppose, early stage of consultancy, working with the market to understand what we do in these buildings through a process of investigative work and consulting review study.
Yeah, that
Um,
sounds like. Sounds like a lot of fun, pretty challenging moving from gas to electricity because
Very,
it's very,
yes.
very challenging. Bigger equipment with electric, different hotter temperatures with gas in terms of the heating hot water.
Hmm.
Yeah, lots of challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some buildings will be perhaps easier than others, just depending on the type of plant in place and how it's been set up. Um, I guess heat pumps is a technology that's been seen as an obvious uh, solution and contribute, you know, technology option to support this process of moving to electrified buildings. But obviously they're not new. It's essentially the technologies there in our chiller plants. But when you go to heating, it sort of changes the dynamics somewhat. Um, so we've done in the lead up to this bigger piece of work, which is heating hot water. We have done some smaller projects in the domestic hot water sphere. Um, Domestic hot water is generally a smaller plant, it's more manageable, it's less costly, and you can trial some of the technology in those applications. So early on, um, we did put a heat pump in one of our smaller buildings, which is a CO2 based heat pump. And at the time, we had an end of trip facility hanging off the central loop. And so it was important to factor that in because obviously that includes people using showers and at the bottom of the building. So you don't want someone to end up with a cold shower because you've put in a system that can't keep up. Um, Funnily enough, we didn't know at the time, but by the time we got the project off the ground, they'd built a new end of trip. So we didn't have end of trip hanging off it, which might have been a good thing because it's only a small system. It's a 15 kilowatt heat pump. Um, but it's been successful and they are, what was interesting is how efficient they actually are. There's a lot of stuff that people get caught up on in terms of specifications and COPs. And, if you get caught out with up to, a COP of 6 or whatever, it's very misleading, especially when you put a heat pump on a reticulated system. Heat pumps don't really like um, they're great in environments where, like, if you put one of these CO2 heat pumps in a dairy farm and you just heat up a big batch of hot water in a tank from a very cold temperature to a hot temperature, they'd be so efficient, so efficient. But when you put it in a reticulated loop where the water's obviously starts cold, warms up, and then stays warm, their efficiency drops off a lot. So we did put thermal metering on it to work out its COP, and on average, it just sits really on about 2. So an average COP of 2. So, if you compare it to a gas system, yes, it's better. It's still more efficient than a gas system. Um, but, for the cost that you spend on these bits of kit, um, it may not sort of be the best way of approaching it. Um,
Yeah.
there's other options like to electrify hot water, especially for small end use. So in one of the buildings, we did a decentralized project. So they were doing all these amenity upgrades, and I was trying to promote instant electric based approach, but it was too late for them to incorporate that because the architect had already decided on all their finishes and how the cabinetry was going to go. So there was nowhere to put a electric instant unit. So in the end, I suggested that they just put a small ring main on each floor, serviced by a small stainless storage tank. So effectively going from one old, 21-story building with a centralized ring main and suggested just putting a small ring main on each floor. Um, and they did that, and it's been successful, and it's electrified the hot water that way. Um, we did connect the units to the BMS just so we had some visibility of temperature. Because if something fails, like a thermostat or something, you'll end up with a electric resistive unit potentially just boiling. So that there's just a different approach that you can take to all of these solutions.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. Lots of challenges, lots of solutions as well, as you said. So, just thanks for describing that, Graham. So, how did you get into energy efficiency or sustainability?
So originally I studied electrical electronic engineering. That was at Swinburne University. To be fair, at the time I wasn't hugely motivated with the academia side of things, and I found university pretty tough. Uh, but I'm not the sort of person who sort of just gives in. So stamina got me through, made it to the end of the degree, and at the end of it, I wasn't really clear on where I wanted to go. Um, at the time, I met my now wife, and we both had sort of similar aspirations to do some travel. We ended up in Japan, not just traveling but working, but had nothing to do with energy efficiency. It was based in a school, um, based in what they call the Anaka, which is uh, you know countryside, regional Japan. So from a cultural experience, um, a life experience, it was amazing. But I knew that when I came back to Australia, I was not going to be a teacher. It's not my forte. So I did do some extra curricular study, remote study while I was in Japan. That was through Murdoch University doing energy studies. It was quite multidisciplinary. It was a postgraduate, and um, there were different parts of that study. So it was energy economics, energy systems, energy management. And I think I really took an interest in the energy management module. Um, so I did that work. I think it bolstered my confidence a bit. And when I came back to Australia, I sort of started looking for roles that had those terms in there: energy management, energy efficiency. And that's where I started. I started off in a small consultancy um, for a while. Didn't quite get along with the manager there, so um, moved on to then Carbonetics, which you were the founder of at the time, and it sort of took off from there.
So you kind of transitioned from consulting then into now working directly for a very large energy user, which was yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
I guess
yeah.
the consulting experience was quite mixed, working for a range of different customers, both government and snippets of commercial. But I think what's common is that they're all dealing with the same challenges. They're all using similar energy sources. They all have buildings. They have heating systems, cooling systems. So that that's it's a little bit different in a commercial environment because we have these large high-rise buildings with central plant. They often use VAVs, variable air volume, for air distribution, which is perhaps less, obviously less common in a smaller building. Um, but the principles are the same. So, we're dealing with buildings that are driven by the neighbours scheme from a market perspective around energy performance. Um, So there's quite a drive there to maintain performance to a high level and push it further. And that's not to mention Green Star, which is also an active, uh, recognized tool that the market knows of. Um, how well they understand these different systems. Usually it's just, how do we get to 5 stars? How do we become, how do we get a green star rating that's better than someone else's? And then we have to explain what's involved. It's not you know, it's a lot of work generally to get these ratings.
Yeah, it's not straightforward, but yeah. But I guess in the end, it's a business decision, and it makes business sense. So that's why it's done. Yeah,
They
yeah,
can
yeah,
certainly
yeah,
leverage
yeah,
improved outcomes in the
yeah,
buildings. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. So, what is it that you're enjoying most about your work? What do you love doing?
Um, Funnily enough, I'm still like still somehow managed to bury myself in data. There's not many people who sort of like, I don't know, play with data all day and find that you know would persist at it. So still using Excel a lot these days. It's almost like a tool of trade, isn't it? But I am taking more of an interest in alternative approaches. Problem with Excel is when you put all this data in it, eventually it breaks because it just can't handle all this all this extra data. So you're really better off working with databases and platforms that can help you manage data. So I'm quite interested in the data, the what would you call it? I suppose data aggregation in platforms. So there is a platform I'm working with at the moment called BitPool, which is it's quite powerful in that you can aggregate data into it from various sources and systems. But then once it's in there, it actually gives you a mechanism to work with the data in a customized way. A lot of platforms I find are quite static. So you pay a fee, they set it up, they put a bunch of dashboards, and once it's set up, you sort of can't change it much. Or or they've gone the other way, they set it up for you, and then it's got like 100 different features, functions, reports, but then you need like an extra degree to figure out how to use it, and it's overcomplicated or something like that. So they're trying to cover their bases for all types of users. So this platform to me is a little bit more um, grassroots in a way. Can actually take data points and create flows, logical flows, and create your own virtual meters, um, and basically create your own dashboards to suit your own needs. I think it's very hard to specify things like visualization. We end up with
Yeah,
BMSs and systems and platforms, and the only way to get a really good outcome is to actually for the contractor to heavily workshop what the outcomes are going to be at the end to try and understand, well, we're going to develop something here. How do we develop something that's useful to the customer? Often that step gets missed, and you just end up with sort of templated reports and charts that may not really um, serve you for what you're trying to do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm quite at the moment quite interested in being more involved in creating our own experiences to solve our own problems without relying on sort of cutting through some of that those hazards I call them in relation to dealing with the market and it's often cost driven, which uh, doesn't always bring the best outcomes.
yeah, yeah. It's really interesting that focus on data there because we're getting more and more data available. And you're right, spreadsheets kind of break down because they've got that flexibility, but they just break down. It's too much data. And then, yeah, so it's fascinating how you kind of, and you've identified that key problem there. Well, you've got mountains of data. How do you make it useful? Um, and interrogate it in a way that's effective. So it's great to see that you've got a system there that you're liking. And I really liked your comment there about workshopping with the contractor because I think that that's probably pretty important to be able to, because often people say, oh, we just need a BMS, and they've got, well, a BMS doesn't save energy. It's being able to effectively use the BMS that saves you energy. Yeah,
Yeah, those
yeah,
sort of finishing touches, if you like, the pages, they often don't. they don't get specified in any prescriptive way on how they should be. So it just ends up being some application engineer's role to produce a bunch of graphics. And the specification might say the BMS is to have 100 visual pages, and like it might have some parameters, suggested parameters, but in terms of look, feel, it's not always that well documented.
Mm. So looking back now, what would be your advice to your younger self now that you've got lots of experience in, you know, in consulting and both, and then being within a large business as as a sustainability engineer? What would be advice to your younger self, Graham?
Poor advice to my younger self. Um,
Mhm.
well, I know it's not directly related to energy efficiency, but definitely don't forget about your health. I think staying fit and healthy is so important for your productivity in any role. I think, you know, I let my health sort of, I got away. I'm one of those people who's sort of skinny and doesn't put on weight, but that doesn't mean that's not something that needs to be done. In these types of roles, we do a lot of sitting, a lot of focused work in front of a computer. It can take a real toll on your body physically, neck, back, um, and all of that eventually erodes the mental side as well, especially if you end up with some weaknesses or problems. So I guess that's my tip of the day is don't forget about your health. Get, I never thought I would, but I've been going to the gym every week for a year with a personal trainer, and it's just made a massive difference to my mental well-being, my productivity. So as far as energy efficiency goes, I'm just trying to think. I guess just stay curious. Don't stop learning. Um, there's so much technology development in these spaces, so it's hard to keep up with all of that. But I just keep just and just focus on the basics, I guess, of
Mm.
what's going to, you know, I think the world's gone mad with platforms. So you could have like 10 different platforms. They're not going to solve your problem. You still need that human um, involvement, that human leadership, that human champion to to drive good outcomes in energy efficiency. So, a platform can be a really powerful tool. They're all tools, but you need people like us to help drive those tools to get the best out of them, to get the best outcomes.
Okay. So if I can kind of summarize what you've said, look after yourself, stay healthy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Be curious. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the third one, if I can kind of paraphrase it or put it in a different way, is you're valuable. Like, yeah, you've got a yeah, an energy engineer's role is really valuable because it's not it's just going to happen. You need people to drive it,
It's
and yeah,
definitely valuable. There's
yeah, yeah.
a lot of people who just, they just don't really understand all the different uh, dimensions of what it takes and to get the benefits out of energy management. Um, so yeah, it's definitely there's so many more roles and positions that relate to what we do now than what there was when I first started. It's uh, that which is good news. And now with such big agenda items, businesses wanting to decarbonize, there's more and more um, pressure on the market to provide those skills.
That's great because that leads into my last question: is where do you see the opportunities for those just starting out in their careers? Very broadly in sustainability, energy efficiency, wherever you want to take it. Where do you think the career opportunities are?
Um, Well, I mean, I'm just thinking every business, they're all using electricity, utilities, electricity, water, and there's obviously still quite a bit of gas use out there. Utilities are something that can turn into a real mess. So there's lots of opportunity to get involved, even on just the initial data side of utilities, managing the bills and um, that's a first step in a way with energy management is understanding what you're consuming so that you can better measure it, and then from there you can start to set targets to reduce, benchmark, and so on. So that's a good stepping stone for some people, is just in that utility management space. um, it's not necessarily the technical side of energy efficiency, but sometimes it may lead to those opportunities. And we still have to deal with the utilities. We have to source bills and have to work with those departments. So there's a little bit of a interrelationship with those teams. I think. Um, I guess just getting yourself into the market would be the biggest challenge, which has probably been like that for a while. But don't be afraid to. I've seen people take on voluntary type positions. They just say, I'm happy to just work for free, like just to get your foot in the door, to build relationships. Sometimes that's what you might have to do just to cut through such a competitive market. But I'm a little out of touch on perhaps how competitive it is now, and maybe there's more opportunities. I think there'd be more opportunities. But yeah, just putting yourself out there is and networking is a really important thing.
So if I could kind of come back, you're saying there's good career opportunities around data and understanding, billing systems and stuff like that. There's also technical opportunities. There's some challenges in I guess getting your first role, but probably once you get that first role, presumably you did pretty well. You've got lots of potential there. And if I go back to your earlier comment about data and your curiosity with data, I agree with you. It's really, really important for energy. So perhaps, if you can have some technical skills coupled with some data skills,
Yeah,
including
yeah.
including be able to, code and program in languages perhaps like R, or I'm trying to think of the other languages that might be used, Python, or others that might be relevant for data sets. Um, that would be
Yeah,
a
that
good way
that
to go.
probably
Yeah.
leads me back to
Yeah.
what would I do differently is perhaps I wouldn't have, perhaps knowing what I know now, I would have paid a little bit more attention in that Java class. As you know, um, coding's not everyone's cup of tea, but
Yeah.
if you can get your head around it, maybe you don't become a seasoned software developer, but it can be still very powerful, just training your brain with those kind of problems, um, to deal with data in different ways. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Graham. It's been great having a chat with you and learning a bit about your career and some of the fun stuff you're getting to do, and the challenges, and also your advice for those starting out. Much appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.